Imagine a prison so secure, so isolated, that even thinking about escape feels impossible, surrounded by freezing waters, deadly currents, and constant surveillance. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison. It was a final destination. The worst criminals were sent here, not just to be locked away, but to be forgotten, day and night. The sound of waves crashing against the island served as a constant reminder there was no way out. The icy water wasn't just cold, it was deadly. Even the strongest swimmers would lose strength within minutes. And beyond that, the powerful currents could drag a man miles of course before he even realized what was happening. Inside the prison, things weren't any easier. Every movement was watched. Every routine was controlled. Guards walked the corridors with strict discipline, checking cells, counting inmates, making sure everything stayed exactly as it should. Lights out meant silence. Doors stayed locked. Hope slowly faded. The guards believed one thing with absolute certainty. No one escapes Alcatraz, and for years, they were right. But then Frank Morris arrived. Frank wasn't loud. He didn't cause trouble. He didn't try to prove anything to anyone. That's what made him different. While others wasted time fighting the system, Frank studied it. He watched the guards carefully. He memorized their schedules. He noticed small details others ignored: the slight delays during night checks, the weak spots in the walls, the sounds that echoed differently through the vents. His mind never stopped working. To everyone else, Alcatraz was the end of the road. To Frank, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. He wasn't planning to survive Alcatraz. He was planning something far more dangerous. He was planning to escape the impossible. Frank quickly realized something most prisoners ignored: the system wasn't perfect. The walls were old. The routines were predictable. And most importantly, the guards were overconfident. Years of no successful escapes had made them comfortable. They believed the prison itself was enough to stop anyone. That belief was their biggest weakness. Frank didn't rush. He observed. He noticed how inspections were done quickly, almost carelessly. He saw how certain areas weren't checked thoroughly. And deep inside the structure, he discovered something critical: the ventilation openings in their cells were surrounded by weakened concrete. It wasn't impossible to break through. It would just take time. That's when he brought to others into his plan. John and Clarence Anglin, the brothers, had experience. They knew how to work with their hands, how to stay patient, and most importantly, how to stay silent. Unlike others who dreamed about escape but feared the consequences, these two were willing to risk everything together. They formed a plan so clever it almost sounded impossible. Every night, when the prison went quiet, they started working. Using crude tools like spoons, scraps of metal, and even parts of a vacuum cleaner motor, they began chipping away at the ventilation openings. Bit by bit, dust by dust. Progress was slow, almost invisible. But it was happening. To avoid suspicion, they carefully collected the broken concrete and disposed of it during the day, mixing it with dirt or washing it away. But the real genius was in the details. To hide the noise, they timed their work during periods when music played loudly in the prison. The sound masked their digging. To hide the damage, they created fake walls, painted cardboard pieces that blended perfectly with the real surface. And to avoid suspicion at night, they created fake heads, carefully shaped from soap and paper, painted to match skin tones, and topped with real hair secretly collected from the barber shop. These dummy heads were placed on their pillows every night from a distance. It looked like they were peacefully asleep, breathing, resting, normal. But behind those vague faces, 3 men were slowly breaking through a prison that was never meant to be broken, and with every passing night, they were getting closer to the impossible. After months of preparation, the holes were finally big enough. What started as tiny cracks had turned into full openings just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Every inch they carved out was a victory, but also a risk. One wrong move, one unexpected inspection, and everything would collapse behind the walls. They discovered something no prisoner was ever meant to find: a narrow, hidden utility corridor. Dusty, dark, and almost forgotten, it ran quietly behind the cells like a secret passage. It was never designed as an escape route. But for Frank, it was exactly that. For the first time, they were no longer completely trapped. But that was just the beginning, because escaping the cells wasn't the hardest part. Escaping the island was. Alcatraz stood alone in the middle of freezing, violent waters. The currents were unpredictable, the temperature deadly, and the distance to shore seemed impossible to cross. Even trained swimmers would struggle to survive for long. Most prisoners never even considered it, but Frank did. He studied the tides. He observed the weather. He calculated timing down to the smallest detail. If they were going to attempt this, it had to be perfect. And then came his most daring idea. Raincoats, dozens of them quietly stolen over time, were collected and hidden. Night after night, the men stitched them together by hand, turning ordinary prison-issued rain gear into something extraordinary. A raft, and life vests.it wasn't strong. It wasn't reliable. One tear, one leak, and the ocean would take them. It was fragile, risky, and completely insane. But it was their only shot. Every detail was planned, from how they would move through the corridor, to how they would climb onto the roof, to the exact moment they would enter the water. Every second mattered, because once they stepped out into the night, there would be no turning back. No second chance, only freedom. Wallace C. June 11, 1962. The night everything changed. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the prison itself sensed something was about to happen. The routine continued like any other evening, guards walking their rounds, keys clinking, distant footsteps echoing through cold concrete halls. But inside those cells, something was different. As darkness fell, the prisoners quietly placed the fake heads on their beds, carefully positioned under the blankets. They looked almost real in the dim light, faces relaxed, eyes closed, as if nothing unusual was happening. From outside, everything looked normal. The guards saw sleeping prisoners, but inside the cells, they were gone. Frank and the Anglin brothers moved with absolute precision. No panic, no hesitation. Every step had been practiced in their minds for months. They slipped through the openings behind their sinks, squeezing into the narrow utility corridor. The space was tight, filled with dust and darkness, but it was their path to freedom. Slowly, they made their way upward. Reaching the top wasn't easy. They had to climb pipes, grip rough surfaces, and pull themselves up quietly without making a sound. Below them, guards continued their routine, completely unaware that history was unfolding. Just above their heads, the wind hit them the moment they reached the roof, cold, sharp, unforgiving. The night was silent, except for the sound of the ocean crashing against the island below. One wrong step, one loose grip, and it would all be over. But they didn't stop. They moved carefully, silently, like shadows disappearing into the dark. Reaching the edge of the island, they quickly began inflating their handmade raft. Their fingers were numb from the cold, their hearts racing, but they stayed focused. There was no time to think, only to act. And then, without a word, they pushed off into the freezing black water and disappeared into the darkness. No alarms, no gunshots, no trace.by. The time the guards discovered the empty cells the next morning, confusion turned into shock, and then panic. Search teams were deployed immediately. Sirens filled the air. The entire island went on high alert, but it was already too late. The men were gone, vanished without a single clue. That morning, the unthinkable became reality. The world's most secure prison had just been beaten. The search was massive. Within hours of the discovery, Alcatraz went from silent and controlled to chaotic and desperate. Sirens echoed across the island as guards rushed into action. Emergency calls were made. Reinforcements arrived. This wasn't just a prison incident anymore, it was a national crisis. Helicopters filled the sky, scanning the dark, restless waters below. Their spotlights cut through the fog, searching for any sign of movement. Boats spread out across the bay, combing every inch, every wave, every possibility. The authorities believed one thing: no one could survive those waters. The temperature alone could shut down the human body in minutes. The currents were powerful, unpredictable, and merciless. Even if someone managed to stay afloat, the odds of reaching shore were almost zero. Days passed, then weeks, still nothing. No raft, no bodies, no solid evidence. Officially, the case was closed. They were presumed dead. But here's where the story takes a darker, more mysterious turn. Because the ocean gave no answers, years later, strange clues began to surface, small, unsettling pieces that refused to let the story die. There were rumors of sightings in distant places, stories of 3 men living under new identities, even letters, sent anonymously, claiming one of them had survived. One photograph, in particular, raised eyebrows, a blurry image showing 2 men in another country, said to resemble the Anglin brothers. Authorities couldn't confirm it, but they couldn't completely deny it either. Some believed the raft worked. that they made it across the freezing waters under the cover of darkness and disappeared before anyone could track them. Some believe they planned everything beyond the escape: new lives, new names, a future far away from Alcatraz, and some believe they truly pulled off the impossible. To this day, no one knows the truth. And no final proof. No clear ending, just a mystery that refuses to fade. Did they drown in the freezing waters? Or did three ordinary men outthink, outplan, and outmaneuver one of the most secure prisons in history? One thing is certain: Frank Morris wasn't just a prisoner. He was a mastermind, a man who looked at the impossible and found a way through it. And whether he survived or not, his story didn't end in Alcatraz. It became a legend. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more unbelievable true stories that will leave you questioning everything.